Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Prashant. I'm a developer advocate with Facebook. I hope everybody had a good lunch. Overeating is a Facebook core competency, so I hope you guys did it well. In this session, we're going to talk about getting started with building social apps using the Facebook SDK for iOS. Again, this session's about iOS. My colleague Bear is next door talking about Android, so depending on your preference, you should pick the right room. So a year ago, I was in your shoes. I was an app developer. I had an app in the App Store, and I was trying to get that app discovered and noticed by people who were my prospective customers. And it turns out that's a really difficult problem. As Simon mentioned, there are 700,000 apps in the iOS App Store. There are 700,000 apps in Google Play. Their conferences are in the next 4 to 6 weeks, so you can expect those numbers to be even higher and revealed to be even higher soon. So getting in front of customers, getting noticed, getting discovered, getting your app downloaded and used is an extraordinarily difficult problem, but it's why we build software. We build software so that people can use it, so that it is actually used. So in this session, I'm going to show you some of the tools that will help your app get noticed. When I was a year ago, we did not have a lot of the things that I'm going to talk to you about today. We didn't have mobile app install ads, for example. Paul's going to talk about that later. Whenever I'm in a meeting with the mobile app install ads team, I start chuckling to myself because this is the feature that I would have needed, the feature that I would have absolutely used to get my initial set of users, to get that first 1,000 users, those first 10,000, first 50,000 users, to get that flywheel of social engagement going. So Paul's going to talk about mobile app install ads. It's going to sound marketing fluff. You're going to think, well, why am I in a marketing session? I guarantee you that's the thing that's going to get you your initial set of users. The next thing you need to do is start building social features into your app. And that's what we're going to talk about here. Because social features embedded in your app will help you drive organic growth and organic engagement inside your application and get you more users as a result. So starting with mobile app install ads, you get discovered, you get in front of new users that you never would have before, you start that flywheel of social engagement going, and then you use a lot of the features I'm going to talk about to get organic growth of your app going after that. So you can get the Facebook SDK for iOS from developers.facebook.com. Judging by the stats and the initial surveys we did of a lot of you, there's about 50-50 folks who have used the SDK in the past and folks who are new to the SDK. I apologize, a lot of the stuff may be rudimentary for those of you who have used the SDK in the past, but there are some new features in the iOS SDK 3.5 that we shipped in New York a couple of weeks ago. There are some new features, and there are some new things that you need to configure. I'll be sure to point those out for those of you who are experienced with the SDK. But for everyone, there's a lot of features here that will really help you drive engagement and growth inside your application. The other thing I want to encourage you to do is really talk to one another. You guys are your best resource. You are the folks who have kind of walked down this path. There may be folks who in this room who are just a little bit ahead of you on the path towards getting discovered in your app. So make sure you spend the time not just talking to folks at Facebook, but networking with one another. You'll learn a lot in this conference as a result. So the question is, why should you use the Facebook SDK at all? Well, Facebook fundamentally is a platform for sharing. When we talk about what people do on Facebook, it's really sharing stories about themselves. It's sharing their personal identity with the world, with their friends, and so forth. And the Facebook SDK enables users to more readily discover your apps as a result of sharing. And we'll talk about why it's important for your apps to enable sharing and what the consequence is of enabling your apps to support sharing in a moment. The other thing the Facebook SDK allows you to do is get really quick and fast access to a user's profile information. Now, why is that important? Well, when you get a user's profile information, you know a lot about the user. You can tailor your app for the user's preferences, the things they like, the languages they speak, what have you. And so getting access to that information is something that not a lot of apps do very well, but I think is a really valuable tool to make your app very useful the first time someone uses it. And then lastly, with the Facebook SDK, you can drive re-engagement of your applications by enabling people to share stories. Their friends see those stories. They can see the stories that their friends are publishing from your apps, and then their interest gets piqued again. They come back to your app, and they use it again. So on one hand, you're looking to discover new users, and then on the other hand, you're trying to get your existing users to come back to your app. And again, a year ago, I was in your shoes, and it was pretty easy to get new users to my app, but they quickly forgot it. Think about what your iPhone looks like today and how many apps are installed on your iPhone. How many times are people going to come back to your app? You know the one app everyone goes to is Facebook, so use Facebook to your advantage to get your app in front of people, and that's what we'll talk about here. The Facebook SDK is your obligatory stack diagram. Your Facebook SDK is comprised of sort of 3 layers of components. The first layer is the core components. This handles the networking and the communication back and forth between your app and Facebook, and things like session management and so forth. The next layer encapsulates and puts a gentle, sort of light wrapper around a lot of the Facebook objects for users, places, graph objects, and so forth. And we'll talk about a few of those things in this session. We'll use a few of those things in this session as well. And then the last component is native user interface components, things like the login button, being able to put a profile picture up on the screen very quickly, being able to look at a list of places that are nearby, being able to look at a user's friends. And so a lot of these things you can, of course, roll your own. You don't have to use our native UI components. And in fact, I, as an app developer, rarely use the last two. I do use the login component and the profile picture view component quite a bit. But the last two, I prefer to have my app use a native style user interface. So in this session, I'm not going to cover those last two, but they're really easy to use. It's a matter of implementing a delegate and then just invoking one of the view controllers. So getting started with the Facebook SDK is simple. The first thing you do is you create a Facebook app on developers.facebook.com. We've got a pretty simple web form for being able to do that. You name your app. You supply information about whether it's an iOS app, what the App Store ID for your iOS app is, and so forth. You then go into Xcode and you drag and drop and add the Facebook SDK to your Xcode project. Really, really simple. You do a few configuration steps in Xcode to configure your project for Facebook. And then you start sharing. You implement Facebook login, you start publishing to the Open Graph. So basically 3 steps, and then you're ready to start coding. Rather than watch me type, I just kind of put that up here. So really quickly, you go to developers.facebook.com. You create a new application. Here I've got an application for social boarding, which enables me to share the runs I do on mountains. And I can specify the display name. That display name is what shows up in Facebook. So you've all seen Pinterest, for example, when your friend pins something on Pinterest. The on Pinterest part comes from the display name. So this is what you want your app to look like inside Facebook's newsfeed. And then you specify namespaces and so forth. Then you also configure that you want your application to be a native iOS app in this instance. You can also, of course, select Android, a Facebook web app. They're not mutually exclusive. You can, of course, have multiple of these, just as Simon was talking about earlier. And then you specify the bundle ID. This is the same bundle identifier that is in Xcode. So this is how you're now linking your Facebook project and your Xcode project together. And then inside of Xcode, this is a couple of new things I want to point out for those of you who are existing users of the Facebook SDK. You want to include now, in addition to everything else, you also want to include the security framework. You can see that on the bottom left-hand corner. And then you have a few configuration steps that you'll need to add to your plist file. For those of you who are, again, upgrading to the latest SDK, we've added a new plist entry for Facebook display name. Weird things happen when you don't include that, and they're very hard to diagnose. And you'll spend a half hour trying to diagnose it, and then you'll realize, oh, I forgot that plist entry. So don't do what I've done many, many times. So the Facebook display name is a new plist entry that you'll have to add. So basically, you just drag and drop a few frameworks, including the Facebook SDK itself, and then you add a few entries to your plist file, and then you're ready to go. Your project is ready to start coding. So the first thing you're going to want to do with your app is enable your app to start sharing. So why does sharing matter? Well, sharing is our expectation, the expectation we have with almost everything we do online. When we see a story that has a certain political bent that we agree with, we share that on Facebook. When we see that the Oatmeal has published a new comic strip, we share that on Facebook. When we see that the Onion has published a new article, we share that on Facebook. And this is something we kind of think of reflexively now. Instinctively, as we're surfing the web and we see something that's cool, we want to share that on Facebook with our friends and get engagement. It's part of who we are now. It's part of our sort of online identity now. But it's also an expectation that we have out of all the apps that we use. You saw Simon show off Connor's taste in music earlier. Now, my taste in music is pretty terrible. I'm a Justin Bieber fan and a Taylor Swift fan, and so it's pretty awful. But I rely on Simon, and I rely on Connor, and I rely on James, actually, to tell me what music I should be listening to. And they share their preferences through the music apps that they use. It's what they expect. They are sort of style mavens, if you will, in terms of music, and they share their music preferences via Facebook. You think about Pinterest. People share a lot of stuff on Pinterest. They create boards on Pinterest, and they want to share their taste on Pinterest. It's an expectation they have out of their apps. Now, I'm a pretty avid CrossFitter, and the other day I downloaded the most popular CrossFit app in the App Store. You would think it's a pretty popular app. It's got a ton of downloads. So I downloaded it, and I started playing with this app. And CrossFitters are pretty much obsessed with keeping track of records, keeping track of what they've done, storing things, and kind of measuring their progress over time. It's also a very social sport in the sense that we're also comparing ourselves with one another and encouraging one another. So in this app, I started using this app for a couple of days, and I started recording things in this app kind of diligently and dutifully in the app. But after a few days, I kind of lost interest because there was nothing in that app that enabled me to share my progress with my friends on Facebook. There was very little in that app that enabled me to convey my identity as a CrossFitter onto Facebook. So I resorted to what everyone else always does, which is just posting status messages about my progress and getting engagement from my friends as a result of that. And so had this app included social features, and some of the social features I'll talk about here, and some of the social features I will talk about in the game session I'm going to do immediately after this. Had this app had a bunch of social features that enabled me to find my friends who are also CrossFitters, enabled me to share my records and achievements with the broader CrossFitting community, if this app had those kind of features, I would have come back more often to this app. As it is, now it's abandoned on my iPhone. It's down in a folder on the 4th screen, and I'm probably never going to use it again. And so what you are looking to do is enable people to share their personality, to share their identity through your apps. It's absolutely essential. We were using the term non-negotiable earlier. I'm not going to say it's non-negotiable, but it's sort of required these days. People want to use your app. They want to share their experiences using their app. So we're going to talk about how to do that in a second as well. The result of sharing is beautiful stories. Beautiful stories end up with better engagement, which will end up in discovery. So think about that for a second. I take something in my app, I share something from something that's inside my app, that shows up in the newsfeed that my friends look at. My friends see that really cool story and they go, hey, what's that? They interact with it, and then they realize there's an app behind that, and they may download it as a result. And then they continue the sharing cycle as well. It's organic growth. And that's what you're really looking for. And again, if you think about all the apps on your iPhone and what apps are on that first screen, I would say for a vast majority of people, Facebook is on that first screen right next to text messaging and email. So let's talk about sharing. So there are three forms of sharing that we enabled using the Facebook SDK. The first form of sharing is what I call good sharing. It's built into iOS 6 and higher. It's the native share sheet inside of iOS 6. Really, really simple to use, one line of code, doesn't require Facebook login at all. And so using this, you can be inside your app, you can pop up the share sheet, supply a URL, and enable someone to preview the story, as you can see here in this little screenshot, and then choose whether they want to post it or cancel. So really, really straightforward, extremely easy to use. In New York 2 weeks ago, we unveiled a new form of sharing called the Native Share Dialog. This uses the latest version of the installed Facebook app. And so what you do here is, again, with one line of code, Facebook login is also not required here. You invoke this dialog box, and then we will, what we call fast app switch, from your app to the Facebook app, where the user can then preview the story, as you can see in this little screenshot. They can add their friends, tag their friends. They can tag places and events as well. They can add their own text to it, and they can post it to their timeline. So this is the native share dialog. It's new. We announced it a couple of weeks ago, and I'll show you how to build this in a second as well. Now, the best form of sharing is using the Facebook Open Graph, or the Facebook Graph API. Using Facebook Open Graph, you can publish really, really engaging stories. You think about Quora, for example, and questions that you're following on Quora, or questions that you've answered on Quora, boards that you've pinned on Pinterest, and so forth. And Christine, immediately after me, is going to talk about the Open Graph form of sharing. And there are a lot of new features we announced a couple of weeks ago in New York as well. So if you are an experienced Open Graph user, or if you're new to Open Graph, I highly encourage you to stick around and watch Christine's session immediately after this. So let's tackle the native share sheet first. This is built into iOS 6 with one line of code, as you can see on the screen. I will invoke the share sheet. So let's go to the demo machine, and we'll actually do this in action right now. So on the screen, you can see that I'm invoking the FB Dialogs class. This is new in the iOS SDK 3.5. And inside the FB Dialogs class, there's a method called present OS integrated share dialog. So this is the share dialog that is integrated into the OS, as you can plainly see. And I'm presenting it from my application. I'm going to supply the initial text, any image that I want to supply as well as a URL. Now, one thing I want to point out here is something about this initial text. So there are a lot of Facebook policies in terms of using our platform. And one of those policies is you can't pre-fill things for a user. And so, for example, in the native share sheet, let's just go ahead. It's actually not going to run, but let me go. Well, I'll describe it. So in the native share sheet, when you present this initial text, you have to obtain it from the user. So maybe put a text field somewhere inside your app so that the user can specify the text, and then you can pre-fill it inside the share dialog. What you can't do is inside your app just supply the text without asking the user first. So this is probably the most common policy violation that we see. And so this is something to keep in mind. So you can't actually supply that initial text unless you're getting it from the user somehow inside your application. Now let's run this. This is actually not going to work, and I'll explain why. And this is my Johnny Ive tribute. It's a minimalist app. I'm going to go ahead and say share. And so you can see I've got a dialog box that says I have no Facebook account configured on this device. So the native share sheet only works when someone has added Facebook as an account on the device. And that's in iOS 6 and higher when we started supporting Facebook. Now, there are quite a few people who do have Facebook configured as an account, but there are a lot more people who don't. So this is an option where you're going to want to check first. There is a method that says, can I do this? Can present OS integrated share dialog modally. You're going to want to check and see if that's possible before presenting it. And if it's not possible, you're going to want to fall back into one of the other options. So keep that in mind. So two things about the native share dialog, or the simple share sheet. The first thing is really easy to use, but you can't pre-configure the text unless you get it from a user. That's one common stumbling block. And the other one is you have to fall back gracefully because not everyone will have configured Facebook on their device. Okay? So let's drop back really quickly to the slides. Okay. So now let's talk about the native share dialog. So again, we announced this a couple of weeks ago in New York. It's a better form of sharing. It uses the Facebook app that's already installed on the device, and that's installed on pretty much every device. It doesn't require Facebook login either, which is also pretty cool. We'll talk about the benefits of Facebook login in a moment, but for now, this does not require Facebook login. It performs an explicit share to the timeline, and by that we mean you present the user with the option of either posting it or canceling out of it. So you're earning your trust with the user as a result of doing that. You're not just posting something to Facebook, you are showing the user what you're about to post, letting them say yes or no, and then moving on. The other really cool thing about this is that when the dialog is presented to the user, they can then tag friends and places to this story, which is a very, very cool thing. If I think back to my mythical CrossFit app where I wish I had sharing functionality, I'd be able to share the gym that I'm at or the people that I'm working out with. And that would be pretty cool as well. A really good story that would drive even greater engagement and then discovery of your app. It also supports app attribution, so that with this, I'm able to share directly from within my app, and the resulting story on Facebook says very clearly what app it came from. That's really important for you because now, when people see that story, they're not only seeing the story that's really cool that their friend just shared, but they're also seeing the app that it was shared from. That helps you with greater discovery and organic growth. And then it also supports Open Graph, which Christine will talk about in a lot of detail, but I'll show you a code sample in just a minute. The result here is a lot more engaging stories. You're giving a lot more control to the user with minimal additional effort. So thinking first about the very simplest form of the native share dialog, again, one line of code, and then I'm using the FB Dialogs class once more, and I'm invoking the present share dialog with link method, where I'm providing a link, of course. And there's a handler block as well. Slightly more complicated, is being able to publish Open Graph stories directly from within your app. And so here, if you think about in the past what you had to do to publish an Open Graph story, it's fairly involved. All you have to do here is configure your object using the FB Graph object class, configure your action and attach the object to the action, and then present the dialog box with the entire information on there. And so you can see here that I've got an Open Graph action that's being published. Prashant hiked a trail on social hiking. Hiked being the verb, trail being the object, and then social hiking being the app. So let's go to the demo machine real quick. And I'm using my little GitHub trick here where I'm just going to switch to a different branch. And so you can see, I'll just show you the view controller interface file. I've got, again, my tribute here to minimalist design. I've got two more buttons, native sharing and the native sharing with Open Graph. When the native sharing button is pressed, I'm going to call this action native share button pressed. One thing I want to point out here is the native share dialogs are not yet shipping. They are in beta. The rest of the SDK is fully available. You can do anything you want with it. The native share dialogs are still in beta. We expect to be out of beta in the next few weeks. So in order to use the native share dialogs for now, you need to specify this one method, FB settings, enable beta feature, and then enable the feature that you want. This only works in debug mode. So you can't ship you can't ship an app with the native share dialogs enabled. And that's just for the time being. That's just for the next few weeks. So make sure you supply that one line of code. It's temporary. And then finally, in the FB, when I invoke FB dialogs, I invoke the present share dialog with link. You can see here I'm supplying a link, and then I've got a resulting handler block. So let's go ahead and run that. And so here I've got a story. It's with a link in it already published. I'm just going to go ahead and say that I've got Bieber fever. And let's just make it so it's public so anyone can comment on it. Because I am proud of my Bieber fever. And then let's just run over really quickly to Facebook itself. And in my timeline, you can see that I've published Bieber fever, my link. But most importantly, you can see here I've got the app attributed to that link as well. Okay. And then, just for the hell of it, we'll embarrass Bear, and we'll say that I was with Bear Douglas when I had Bieber fever. And I think I'm here. Well, it's actually going to default to San Francisco, so we'll just go ahead and say post that just for fun, and we'll see how many people would like to comment on that. Okay, so let's drop out of that real quick, and we'll go back to the slides. So I've shown you a bunch of options for sharing, and they all have different pros and cons. The iOS 6 simple share sheet is the easiest thing to do, built into iOS 6. The only problem, as we saw, is that the person who's using your app must have the Facebook account configured on their device. In addition, they can't tag places, and they can't upload photos with their story, and so forth. The other two options are interesting. So the native share dialog, and what I haven't shown you yet is Open Graph, and that's what Christine's going to talk about in a minute. There's a subtle difference between the two. You can do everything you want between the two of them. The biggest difference is Facebook login. So far, I've shown you a bunch of options for sharing from your app, but I haven't shown you anything about Facebook login. It isn't required yet. Now, the thing is, though, that when I'm using the share options I've shown you so far, the simple share sheet as well as the native share dialogs, neither of those dialogs or neither of those options reflect the user experience or the user design that you are building into your app. And you are undoubtedly spending a lot of money or a really good amount of effort on building an awesome user experience for your apps. That's also pretty much these days required. And so when you build an awesome experience inside your app, a great user experience inside your app, you want to make the sharing just as natural as everything else in your app. And in order to do that, you need to support Facebook login, and you need to support Facebook Open Graph. I'll talk about login in a moment, and Christine will talk about Open Graph in a little bit. But that is the biggest difference between the native share dialogs, in which you can publish Open Graph stories and everything else, and embedding sharing directly within your app in a very natural, integrated way. So the real question for you is, do you want to support your own user experience and extend that to the sharing metaphor? Or are you okay with just letting someone share very quickly from within your app and then publishing stories from within your app? That's a decision that you have to make for yourselves, but we provide both options for you. Okay. Now, the other thing about sharing that's pretty cool is deep linking. I think Simon touched on this a little bit briefly, and I'm going to show you how we actually build it right now. So deep linking is pretty straightforward. It's what enables this virtuous cycle of organic sharing to happen. So you enable publishing from within your app. So people are using your app, they see something or they do something really awesome inside your app, and they want to share it with their friends. So they share it. Your friends or their friends now see that story inside their newsfeed. And when they see that story inside their newsfeed, because it's a beautiful story, it's awesome, you've picked a really big image, you've picked a really awesome image and a really cool story to go along with that image, because you've done a really good job tweaking that story, their friends are going to see it inside their newsfeed and they're going to say, wow, that's pretty cool, I want to click on that, or I want to start using that. 751 million people every month are using Facebook from a mobile device. They are glued to their device, and you see it every day when people are in queue at the grocery store, when they are at a movie theater, when they've got time on their hands, they're just playing with Facebook. When they see your story that their friend has published from your app, they're going to engage with that story. And when they click on that, what's going to happen? You want to enable deep linking so that when they engage with that story, they come to your app. And if they don't have your app installed on their device already, they go to the App Store where they're now given an opportunity to download your app. This is how you drive the organic growth that's necessary inside your apps. And so this is pretty much the critical feature. If you're going to take away any two things out of this conference, the first one is start experimenting with Open Graph, and the second one is start supporting deep linking. Now, deep linking works best with incoming links. And what do I mean by this? So if you look on the left-hand side, my best friend Horatio has published a story. He's pinned something to Pinterest. Now, I think that's a pretty cool story. That looks like a really nice recipe. I want to see what's up. What is Horatio doing? And so I engage with that story. I don't want to end up in just a random place in Pinterest or in a start screen on Pinterest. I want to end up at that story in Pinterest. I'm friends with Horatio. I want to see what he's up to, and I want to see that in Pinterest. So it's really important in deep linking to parse the incoming link. And parse the incoming link and then deposit the user in a relevant spot based on that link. And so how do we do that? Well, inside the handle open URL method inside your app delegate, you want to grab the link that's coming into your app. And so here I'm using the FB app call class, and I'm using the handle open URL method. And one thing that's new in the iOS SDK 3.5 is we actually provide helper classes and helper objects for you to get at that data. So you can see here inside the FB app call, I am calling applinkdata.targetURL. Now, this wasn't hard to do in the past. It wasn't impossible to do in the past. It was just annoying to do, to parse an entire string and then look for the target URL parameter and then parse that out as well. Now you have immediate access to the target URL that's being sent into your app. And then from here, you can say, what's in that target URL? Oh, I want to take that user to that recipe inside of Pinterest or to that specific object inside of my app. Okay, so far, we have enabled people to share from your app, which is pretty awesome. Really great stories. Their friends now see those stories. When they see those stories, they choose to engage with those stories because they're really big pictures. They're very, very vibrant, very interesting stories. They choose to engage with those stories. And when they do, they end up either in the App Store where they can download your app, or they end up in your app itself if they've already downloaded it. So this now completes sort of that virtuous cycle of sharing and creating that organic growth. So then we've not done anything with Facebook Login. So why should you use Facebook Login at all? So we like to say that Facebook Login is your gateway to really awesome stuff. Specifically, you can get information about a user's identity, who they are, what they like, what languages they speak, and so on. You can get information about a user's friends. You can get, if you're a game, you can appear in search, and you can get better distribution by supporting Open Graph. So Facebook Login is incredibly easy to support. You add 2 lines of code to the viewDidLoad method, And then you implement the FB login view delegate, which is 4 methods. One for error handling, one for the user just logged in, one for the user just logged out, and one that's a callback that gives you actually the user information. There are 2 kinds of Facebook login dialogues. The first one is the one that's built into iOS 6 and above. This dialog is invoked if they've already configured their Facebook credentials on their device. If they haven't, then we fall back into the native login dialog, which we announced a couple of weeks ago in New York. And this native login dialog is much more interactive. It enables someone to see what the app is that's requesting permissions, why they're requesting permissions, and so forth. And it's just it's a lot prettier story than you would have seen before. So let's go ahead to the demo machine, and let's do this in action as well. So again, I'll do my little GitHub trick. And you'll see here at the top of my view controller, I've got the viewDidLoad method. I am adding 2 parameters here. So I'm supporting which read permissions. We'll talk about permissions in just a moment and what they are. And then I'm specifying the delegate. And then I'll go ahead and implement the delegate, the FB login view delegate. So here I'm handling the error. This is the important stuff here. This is where I'm getting the user's information. And so this delegate has a user object associated with it. You can see here. It's of type FB graph user. And then from this, I can grab things like the user's first name. I can grab the user's ID, which I can specify in the profile picture view that's part of the Facebook SDK. And I can specify the ID, and then I'll be able to see that particular user's avatar or profile picture. So let's run this really quickly. And you can see I've got the Facebook login button. And in here, I'll just go ahead and say I want to log in. Because, as you saw earlier, I don't have my Facebook credentials on this device, we immediately fail over to the native dialog box that we unveiled a couple of weeks ago. And so here you can see the social boarding would like to access, and we saw the permissions earlier, my email address as well as my likes. And I'll say OK. And then you can see I'm grabbing the user's first name, it's Prashant, and then I'm grabbing the profile picture. Really, really simple. 2 lines of code in viewDidLoad, and then 4 methods you implement in the delegate. And now you've got Facebook login. Okay, let's go back really quickly to the slides, please. Now, there are a lot of really good best practices for using Facebook login. The first one I would say is use the latest SDKs. Because when you use the latest SDKs, you get access to the native to the latest dialogues. The native dialog inside of iOS 6, for example, the native dialog that's part of the Facebook app, the thing that we announced a couple of weeks ago. You also want to augment your own authentication mechanism. Like I said, a year ago I was in your shoes. I had an app in the App Store. We started off by supporting only Facebook login. And we saw that we got a bunch of downloads, and maybe 50 to 60%, somewhere in that range, would actually complete the authentication and then start using our app. And so we said, well, let's kind of retrench a little bit, and let's support our own authentication mechanism as well. So enable the user to supply their email address and their password. And so when we did that, we reshipped into the App Store. We saw greater downloads. And what we saw was really interesting. Now we had 70 to 80% of our downloaders complete authentication and start using our app. And even more intriguing than that is of that 70, 80%, overwhelmingly, around 90% of them chose Facebook login. So what's the difference? They chose Facebook login anyway, but you gave them the choice. And when you give people the choice, they will implicitly trust you. And when you give people the choice of whether they can supply their email address and password as well as Facebook login, they begin to trust your app, and they'll say, well, you know what? They're going to be responsible with my Facebook login info. And they'll choose Facebook login anyway. And we'll talk about some of the benefits of using Facebook login for customizing apps in just a moment. So make sure that you're kind of earning that trust as you go. I think Simon referred to this earlier. We also recommend you support, we actually require that you separate read and write permissions. And I think more importantly than that is don't do the rapid fire, asking for read permissions, and then when they're done, then ask them for write permissions. That doesn't really make any sense, and most users immediately look at that and think, what's going on with this app? Why is it constantly asking me for information? And they have a higher rate of abandonment as a result. The other thing that's important is asking for write permissions in context. Ask for write permissions when you're about to do something where you're going to be publishing something to someone's timeline. Don't just ask for write permissions somewhere randomly inside the app. Make sure that the user is in the mindset that they want to share something, that they're doing an action that is going to result in a share. And at that point, they'll be more likely to support or to grant you permission to publish to their profile. The other best practice that we recommend that very few people actually do is explaining why people should use Facebook login at all. Give people an explanation of what you're going to do with their data and why you need Facebook login in the app. We actually, and I intentionally made this sort of a dense slide. We went back in Menlo Park and we looked at the top 100 apps that use Facebook today and use Facebook login today. And these aren't just apps with 20 or 30 monthly active users. These are the big guys that you've all heard of. And we looked at sort of the common login mistakes that a lot of these apps made. And I want to call out a few of them. I've already covered back-to-back read and write permissions. The other one that's kind of intriguing is there's no way to log out of the app. Right? So when you let someone log in with Facebook, there's no way to let them log out of Facebook. So think about that as well. The other really important thing is when people give you permissions inside the app, they can rescind those permissions at any time from within their Facebook profile. You've all seen inside Facebook, you can go to settings and you can look at the apps that you've enabled and you've authorized. At any time, a user can rescind a permission. So make sure your app handles that instance gracefully, that it doesn't hang, that it doesn't crash, that you're very gracefully handling the instance where someone has actually rescinded permissions. And there's some other things here. The other one is, I think is really bizarre, is someone logs in with Facebook, and then some of these apps then present another user and email address and a password screen. So why are you making me sign up twice? That's a bizarre one that we see way too often. So here's some common mistakes. We'll publish the slides to the group after this, so you'll be able to grab these in a second. So just a quick overview of login. There are basically 3 options. I've covered 2 of them. The first one is the iOS 6 native, where the dialog box pops up. We've all seen that before. The other one is the new native login dialog. The Uber fallback to all this stuff is just the web login to Facebook. And you can see here that they have different requirements of which iOS version they support. But the biggest one is if the Facebook account is configured on iOS 6 and higher, we will default to the native iOS dialog experience. Okay, so now that we've got Facebook login, let's do some stuff with it. And the big thing that I always talk about when I start using apps for the very first time is the empty room problem. When I show up inside of an app and I've logged in with Facebook, there's no way for me inside that app, or that app, for example, doesn't know anything about me. And why not? I've already logged in with Facebook. They can access my credentials that I give them permission to do. So why don't they know that I like certain bands, or I like certain brands, or that I like certain places, or that I live in a certain city and state? How come the app doesn't automatically glean this information and immediately tailor an initial experience to me? And I think apps that do that have a greater chance of getting a lot better initial engagement, which could drive long-term engagement as well. So to access this information, you have to access a user's social graph. And the social graph is the graph of a user's friends, the things that they like, and the actions that they performed in other apps. And you can get all of this information using the Graph API. And the Graph API, if you have a laptop open, you can go to graph.facebook.com/me, and you can see a JSON representation of you. And if you use the Graph API Explorer, you'll be able to provide an access token and get a lot more information about yourself from within Facebook. And so we provided several endpoints. The most important endpoint is graph.facebook.com/me, which lends us to have our little internal slogan, "Call me maybe," where you can grab information about a specific user. And you can grab more data. In my games talk immediately after this, I'll show you some cool things you can do with the Graph API to manage scores and scoreboards and things like that. Now, in order to get this data, you need to get permission from the user. And we've got a pretty robust privacy and permission model. You can see here on the left-hand side of the screen all the things that you can access from a user's Facebook profile. And there's a lot of information. You can get access about their friends, you can get access about themselves, their relationships and languages that they speak, and so forth. There's a lot of data there that you have access to. And the important thing is, as a great philosopher once said, is with great power comes great responsibility. You have access to a lot of information about a user. And you can ask for a lot of things if they make sense. But you don't want to be this app on the right. This app on the right is asking for a ton of information. And what's your first instinct when you see a dialog box like that? You think, why does this app need all this stuff? You know, if you're a game, a music game, for example, it totally makes sense to ask for the music that a person has listened to. But if you're not, if you're just some other kind of game, like Candy Crush, for example, Candy Crush would never ask for the music that a person listened to. It doesn't make any sense. So only ask for those things that are absolutely required inside your app, that make sense to the user implicitly inside your app. And I kind of colloquially refer to that as don't be creepy. Don't ask for a lot of things that are unnecessary, and don't be a creepy app. So I'm going to cover the Graph API Explorer really briefly. Inside your Facebook profile, in your About Me section, you can see a bunch of basic information. And this is my profile information. You can see the languages I speak. I speak American English. I speak profanity in American English. I also speak Klingon, which is true. And then in order to get this information, languages is embedded inside the user likes permission inside of Facebook. And so if I want to get the languages that a person speaks, which is a pretty legitimate thing, you might want to tailor your app to the languages that a person is able to speak. If you've got a translation app, for example, you may want to put those things at the top of a picker, at the top of a dialog box. And so you can access a person's languages from the user likes permission. And with that information, you can then get a JSON representation of the user, and you can see that the languages that they speak. Once you have that information, you can execute a Graph API request on the user. And then you can iterate over the result and see, look for the languages key, and then see what languages they speak. So let's go to the demo machine really quickly, and let's go ahead and take a look at this in action. OK. And you can see at the bottom of the screen here, whoops. Where's the login? There we go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the user. I'm going to pull the languages object from the user. I'm then going to iterate over the languages object and look for any language who's got a name of Klingon. And if they do, I'm going to alter the user interface so that it's all Klingon. Really straightforward. And you know, it's a stupid example, but there's a lot of information inside a person's profile that you can then access as well. So let's go ahead and run this really quickly. And you can see that I'm logged in already. I've queried the Graph API, and I've pulled information that says that I speak Klingon, and I've gone ahead and modified the UI as a result. Let's go back to the slides real quick and wrap up. So far in this session, we've learned a few things. The first thing is how to share, and we've learned sort of the importance of sharing. And you want to enable people to share awesome stories from within your app, because the result of that is that their friends then engage with those stories. When they engage with those stories, they discover your app. And when you support things like deep linking, they can then be taken to your app directly or taken to the App Store where they can download your app. It's the best way for you to drive organic growth of your application. So I highly recommend that inside your apps, if you're not supporting sharing today, start supporting sharing right away. It's an expectation that everyone has now of the apps that they use. I also recommend supporting Facebook login and then subsequently supporting Facebook Open Graph, as Christine will talk about in just a moment. This is how you drive organic growth from within your app, but in a way that's really integrated with the user experience of your application. And then finally, I highly recommend that you start accessing the social graph using the Graph API and doing so in a responsible manner, but doing so in a way that you can start tailoring your app for a user's experience. So there are a few resources that are available. The first one is, of course, the Facebook SDK for iOS. You can download that right now. It's free. It's available on developers.facebook.com. The samples that I've done here, as well as a bunch of other samples, are on my GitHub, CoolAssPuppy. And then there are a bunch of sort of sanctioned Facebook samples that are on FB samples on GitHub. Tope is around here somewhere. He is a good friend of ours, and he has an awesome design site for independent developers. A great way for you to get a great user experience inside your apps very quickly. And he has graciously supplied a coupon code to get 25% off of his design templates that are on App Design Vault. And I highly recommend these. You'll be able, as an independent app developer, be able to build a really polished, beautiful app right away. It's indispensable for me. It's, along with Facebook, I think, the two things that really make an app stand out without having to spend a ton of resources. So bottom line, we're all here because we're app developers, and we want people to discover and start using our apps. And so that's a really hard thing. There's 700,000 apps in the App Store, 700,000 apps in Google Play, and it's a very, very difficult concept. But with Facebook, with the Facebook SDK, you can start driving organic growth inside your applications and enable people to discover your apps very quickly and break through this noise of 700,000 apps in both app stores. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Immediately after this is Christine Abernathy's Facebook Open Graph talk. If you're new to Open Graph or you're upgrading from a previous SDK, I highly recommend that you stick around and watch her talk. I am going to be next door talking about social games using the Facebook SDK, where we'll put into action some of the things that we've talked about here as well. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.